In 1954, a train conductor near Wilmington filed an official report about a light that chased his locomotive for 4 miles. It was not the first report. It would not be the last. Railroad records on that stretch of track go back further than the light's official name, and every single one describes the same thing. A swinging lantern, low to the ground, moving at a speed no man could match on foot. The railroad company investigated. Engineers checked signal equipment, swamp gas, reflections from passing headlights. Nothing matched. The light kept appearing, on schedule, for decades, until the tracks themselves were finally pulled up in the 1970s. The light did not need the tracks to keep showing up. This is North Carolina, not the version with lighthouses and barbecue trails. The other one, the version locals talk about only when a stranger asks the right question, in the right tone, usually after dark. 6 places. 6 accounts that have survived generations of retelling without falling apart. Some are backed by county records. Some are backed only by the fact that nobody who lives nearby will argue with you if you say the place feels wrong. Start anywhere on this list, and you'll notice something uncomfortable by the end. The deeper the history, the harder it is to explain away. The light near Wilmington has a name. Locals call it the Marco Light, after the depot where it was first reported in the 1870s. The story attached to it involves a railroad flagman named Joe Baldwin, who according to local record was decapitated in a coupling accident in 1867 while trying to warn an oncoming train that the caboose ahead of him had come loose. He ran down the tracks, swinging his lantern to signal danger. The train hit anyway. Within a few years, people traveling that stretch of rail began reporting a swinging light moving along the tracks at night, alone, low to the ground, with no visible source. Not once, not twice, for over 100 years. By the early 20th century, the light had become well known enough that sitting presidents supposedly asked about it during train stops through the region. Grover Cleveland is said to have requested a viewing. The Atlantic Coastline Railroad, which operated the tracks, took the reports seriously enough to investigate multiple times, ruling out reflected headlights, will-o'-the-wisp gas, and foxfire. None of the explanations survived contact with the actual conditions under which witnesses reported seeing it. Clear nights, no traffic on adjacent roads, no fires for miles. The tracks were removed in 1977. Some witnesses say the light still appears along the old right-of-way, on ground where the rails no longer exist. If that's true, the explanation gets harder, not easier. A reflection needs something to reflect off. An old grievance doesn't need infrastructure at all. That should have been the strangest thing about the North Carolina coast. It wasn't close. Roughly 90 miles north, past Elizabeth City, the land turns into something older than the roads running through it. The Great Dismal Swamp straddles the Virginia border, over 100,000 acres of black water, cypress, and peat bog so dense that surveyors in the 18th century, including a young George Washington, who helped map parts of it for a drainage company, describe it as nearly impossible to move through in a straight line. At the center of the swamp sits Lake Drummond, a nearly circular body of water with murky, tannin-stained water the color of strong tea. Indigenous oral tradition and later colonial folklore both attach a specific legend to that lake. A young Native American woman, sometimes called the Lady of the Lake, who is said to appear on the water at night in a canoe made of white birch, paddling silently, searching for a lover lost generations ago. Poet Thomas Moore wrote about the legend in 1803 after visiting the region, which gave it wider circulation outside the communities who had always known the story. What Moore's poem left out was the part locals still mention. The swamp has claimed people. Not folklore, documented disappearances. Going back to before the Civil War, when the Dismal Swamp was also one of the largest maroon communities in North America, home to escaped enslaved people who built settlements deep in the interior specifically because the terrain made them nearly impossible to find. That history matters here, because it means the swamp's reputation for swallowing people who don't want to be found is not superstition. It's documented function. The same terrain that hid runaway communities for decades also hides bodies, equipment, and boats that go in and don't come back out. The canoe on the lake might be legend. The swamp's ability to erase a person completely is not. At first, that seemed like the edge of it. One light, one lake. It wasn't. Head inland, toward the middle of the state, and the ground changes from water to red clay, and the stories change with it. Just outside Durham, on land that has been continuously farmed and lived on since the 1850s, sits the Duke Homestead, the original tobacco farm where the Duke family built the fortune that would eventually fund a university and reshape an entire regional economy. The homestead is a state historic site now, carefully preserved, tours running through the original farmhouse and curing barns. What the tour guides mention if you ask, and generally don't volunteer if you don't, is the family cemetery on the property, and the specific account tied to Uwharrie Duke, the matriarch who died in 1858 after years of illness, well before her family's fortune materialized. Staff and visitors over the decades have reported the smell of pipe tobacco in rooms of the farmhouse where no one is smoking, a specific and identifiable scent that several independent witnesses, descents with no connection to each other, across different years, have described using nearly identical language. Cold spots in the same upstairs room. A rocking chair that has been found in motion with no one near it, more than once, by staff opening the house for the day. None of this is advertised on the historic site's official materials. State-run museums are cautious institutions, but talk to enough people who have worked there across enough years, and the same handful of details keep surfacing independently, which is usually the moment a story stops being dismissible as one overactive imagination and starts looking like a pattern. The deeper you go into the state's interior, the less these stories feel like isolated anomalies and the more they feel like a shared inheritance, as if something about the land itself keeps producing the same kind of account, decade after decade, family after family. 90 minutes west, near the Uwharrie National Forest, the geography turns to some of the oldest mountains in North America, worn down over hundreds of millions of years into low, rounded ridges that look gentle from a distance and disorient completely once you're inside them. Hikers and hunters in the Uwharries have reported, consistently and for over a century, the specific sensation of losing all sense of direction despite clear skies, visible sun, and reliable compasses. Search and rescue operations in the forest have documented cases where experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the terrain, became lost within sight of trails they had walked dozens of times. Geologists have a partial explanation. Some of the rock formations in the Uwharries carry unusually high concentrations of magnetite, which can interfere with compass readings in specific pockets. That accounts for equipment malfunction. It does not fully account for the accounts of people who weren't using a compass at all, who describe a specific and consistent feeling of being turned around, of walking toward a landmark and ending up somewhere else entirely, sometimes repeatedly, on the same afternoon. Local search and rescue volunteers, speaking to regional newspapers over the years, have described certain sections of the forest with a kind of professional caution, not folklore, just an acknowledgement that some ridgelines produce more search calls than the terrain difficulty alone should explain. Nobody official will call it anything other than a statistical pattern. But statistical patterns in a forest with no unusual elevation, no unusual weather, and no unusual difficulty still deserve a second look. By this point, the pattern across the state starts to become impossible to ignore. Every region, coast, swamp, farmland, mountain, has produced its own version of the same core experience, something that doesn't behave the way it should, reported by enough independent, credible witnesses across enough decades that dismissing all of them requires more effort than taking the report seriously. Which brings the story to the place that ties the others together, not because it's the most dramatic, but because it's the most fully documented, and because its resolution never actually arrived. On the outskirts of Asheville, high in a hollow near the Blue Ridge Parkway, sits what locals have called the Riddlehouse property for generations, not its original name, but the one that stuck after a series of unexplained events in the early 1900s. Public land records show the property changed hands 7 times between 1901 and 1940, each sale occurring within 2 years of the previous purchase, unusually rapid turnover for a rural mountain homestead in that era. County deed records confirm the pattern. What they don't confirm, because no official record exists, is why. Oral history collected by regional folklorists in the 1970s, recorded interviews now held in a university archive, describes a consistent thread across multiple owning families. Strange sounds in the walls at night described as tapping in a specific, repeating rhythm. Livestock found agitated and displaced from enclosures with no evidence of a break-in. And at least 2 separate families who left the property abruptly, within a year of purchase, without selling their belongings first. One family, interviewed decades later, gave a statement that researchers preserved on tape. They left in the middle of the night and never went back for the furniture. The house itself burned down in 1941. Cause never conclusively determined, and was never rebuilt. The foundation is still there, overgrown, on private land now owned by a family who, according to the same folklore archive, has asked researchers not to publish the exact location, not out of superstition, They said, but because they'd rather not have people trespassing at night to find out. That's the part that separates this account from a ghost story. Nobody involved with the Riddlehouse property, across more than a century of records, was trying to build a legend. Deed offices don't fabricate rapid resale patterns for entertainment value. University folklore archives don't invent tape recordings. The people who left in the middle of the night had nothing to gain by making up a story that cost them their furniture. What they left behind was a pattern with no explanation attached to it. And North Carolina, it turns out, is full of those. A light with no source that outlived the tracks it followed. A lake that has genuinely swallowed people, whatever else is true about the canoe on its surface. A farmhouse where the same detail keeps surfacing from witnesses who never spoke to each other. A forest that turns experienced hikers around in perfectly clear weather. A house that burned down after 7 families couldn't explain why they kept leaving. None of these places asked to be strange. They just are, on the record, across generations, independent of anyone's desire to tell a good story. Maybe that's the more unsettling version of all this. Not that North Carolina is haunted in some dramatic, cinematic sense, but that certain pieces of ground simply accumulate something over enough time, enough death, enough leaving, and refuse to let it go quietly. The tracks near Wilmington are gone. The light, according to people who still drive that stretch of road at night, is not. Thanks for watching till this end. Like and subscribe to our channel for more such videos. See you in next video, guys. Bye.